So lovely. So my name's Liz Redway. For those of you that don't know me, I run Redway HR, and we're a small company offering HR support and management development as well. And we're here today to talk about strategic recruitment. And before I launch in, I thought I'd just like to introduce the team to you. We're an award-winning team. We provide leaders and managers with both operational and strategic HR solutions. And we work with clients from startups to established businesses, supporting corporate and not-for-profit organisations as well, including charities, retailers, accountants and technology companies. Like I've said, we are recording, so if I could ask you just to mute yourselves, just in case there's any background noise, and also turn off videos unless, of course, you want to feature in the video as well. Alrighty then. So I won't go through in too much detail the other bits and pieces we do. Suffice to say that lots of our clients come to us because they're struggling with employee relations issues, conflict, dispute management, that kind of thing. So we support with investigations, disciplinaries, grievances, and so on. But it's great to be able to talk to you today about something a little bit more positive, a little bit more strategic. And of course, this is training we deliver in-house for some of our clients, as well as, of course, delivering some of the recruitment support that we're going to talk to you about today. So the things we're going to cover, we're going to look at the importance of strategic recruitment. We're going to give you a bit of insight into our 10-point framework for strategic recruitment and a model for potentially applying that framework into your own organisation. And then we have got a few minutes on the practicalities for recruiting during a pandemic. It's been interesting going through that roller coaster over the past 12 to 18 months and seeing how the job market has really been affected. And we're still struggling now, not us personally, but our clients quite often with an overwhelm of people applying for jobs, unsuitably so, or even some of our clients are really struggling to find high quality candidates. So we'll look at that as well. And well, let's start here, the importance of strategic recruitment. But there's lots of reasons why thinking strategically about anything is important. And I'm sure we could all come up with a number of really great quotes on the importance of planning and the importance of strategic thinking. And they all apply to recruitment, of course. Well, in fact, anything that applies to your workforce, because it's the people in your business that are looking after your customers quite often. These are some of my favourite quotes. I'm sure you have several more. I guess the point I do want to make before we launch into the detail here is that there is research from the CIPD which shows that more than half of UK employers intend to recruit in the next 3 months. The economy is sort of starting to reopen. And so what we want to do now is think about how we do that in the best way, for the best possible impact on the bottom line in terms of keeping performance running in the team, as well as possible in the absence perhaps of somebody whilst you're recruiting. Also impacting on the bottom line is the engagement of the current people in the team whilst there's that vacancy, and how quickly you can get your new employee to feel engaged and motivated and part of that team and really hit the ground running. We can look potentially at retention and how recruitment impacts on retention and the longevity of the decisions that you're making as well. But of course, on the flip side, avoiding things like wasted time recruiting, poor decisions being made, which means that you have to recruit again and again. And of course, the cost of those mistakes can be massive, thousands of pounds. So thinking strategically before you start recruiting can be really powerful. So our 10-point framework here is laid out in front of you. And all of these are key to that strategic recruitment piece that we want to talk about. And we're going to go through each one of these in turn over the next, just less than an hour that we've got together. And starting off with employee brand, of course. So this is similar to the way that corporate branding works. And that really is the value proposition to customers, defining your products and services in the marketplace. Well, employer brand is the market's perception of your company as an employer. And how important is that? Well, Glassdoor tells us that we're making a decision on whether to apply for a job or not. 84% of employees, or job seekers as they are at that stage, say that the reputation of a company as an employer is important to that choice. 75% of hiring decision makers say it's easier to attract that top talent that you're looking for when those people know a bit about your organisation. So let's focus for a moment then on how to market your company to your next ideal candidate or employee. And it's not rocket science. There's lots of really simple things that you can do yourselves. If you've got a page on your website talking about careers, for example, or vacancies, perhaps you could even put images of your team out on there in amongst your products pictures or your service marketing. Have a think about your LinkedIn page, other social media, all really great ways of putting across not just your corporate branding, but your employer branding as well, and potentially mixing the two together. You could also do things like harnessing Glassdoor. Have a think about what would make your employees really sing your praises over there on Glassdoor, which is, of course, is that website where people go and read reviews about employers and what it's like to work there. And with all of that, it's about thinking what works well on employer branding and how to build that into a repeatable process so that you can replicate it again and again, and therefore attract that top talent every time you need to recruit. So it's worth thinking about what those messages are and how to consistently communicate that to potential candidates, not just today, now, because maybe you've got a vacancy, but long before your next vacancy as well, so that the messages can steep out there and be read by potential candidates. I recently came across a website called Textio, which will run a free employer brand report for you if you put your website in there. So that might be a little exercise you can take away from today. Go to Textio, put in your website and see what comes back in terms of your employer branding and how attractive that might be to your potential employees of the future. Now, next to that, of course, is the second element, and that is your employee value proposition. It's quite closely linked. These are the hooks, if you like, that hook in the potential candidates. So this is what you offer to your employees in exchange for their experience, their talents, their contacts, and their skills. So an employer value proposition includes everything from your mission and vision and values and culture, of course, and gives those employees a really powerful reason to come and work for you specifically. It's everything your company offers an employer in exchange for those skills and experiences, as I've mentioned. So in simplest terms, of course, you can think of this as the benefits framework that you provide to employees, whether that's a golden hello when they sign on the dotted line, whether it's volunteering days, a Christmas party, dental, healthcare, table football in the canteen, the ability to work from home, of course, or flexi time. So while there's a whole array of different things that you can do, you might not know that professional development is seen as one of the top valued benefits over and over again, whether that is training or whether that's internal opportunities for promotion. It's certainly worth exploring, particularly as there are benefits to growing your own talent, of course, and recruiting internally where you can. So have a think about what's important to your current team of employees that are currently working for you, but also what might be important to your desired candidates. Pin down exactly what your employer's value proposition needs to be, because once you define that, of course, it's far easier for you to communicate to potential employees in a variety of formats. So that's our starting point. And then the other two elements of our proactive foundations for strategic recruitment, of course, is the employee journey. Now, This is, if you like, the pathway any employee follows with your organisation, starting from when they apply for a job and ending when they've left your organisation. At the time between each of those moments, of course, it's those experiences that become their journey. And identifying the moments that matter as part of that journey, the stepping stones, if you like, is really important, particularly as improving the points in the stepping stone, those moments that matter, can have great impacts. Now, quite often those stepping stones or elements of the journey are firsts, if you will. First interview, first day, first time they log onto their laptop, first promotion, first employee of the month, first performance review, first pay review. There are all sorts of moments that matter in that employee journey. And of course, what we want to look at in terms of recruitment is the elements of that journey that relate to attracting and bringing on board the top talent and making that journey as easy and streamlined as possible, so that when someone joins, they're really starting from a really positive perspective, engaged perspective and motivated perspective, because that's how you'll see the greatest hitting the ground running, the best performance as early as possible, which of course is what you're looking for from anybody. So, having thought about the employee journey and all of those points from applying for your job to being interviewed and improved on those as early as possible, it means that those people are going to hit the ground running. They're going to stay with you far longer perhaps than somebody that doesn't have quite as nice a journey, and so it's worth thinking about. And then we have investment mindsets. So by investment, I'm thinking about cost, financially, and time. Now, we often see, or feel rather, a pressure to fill a vacancy as quick as humanly possible, particularly if time is short before that current incumbent moves on. We certainly don't want to have a very long gap before the next person joins. But it quite often is the case, and I've seen it over and over again, of more haste, less speed. And if you think about this from the perspective of you're going to be spending probably £18,500 on that recruit during the first year of that employment, because of course that's the minimum wage for a year, you're likely to be spending actually a lot more than that, because you've got pensions considerations, national insurance considerations, all sorts of other employer costs, equipment, the list goes on. Of course, if you're using the national average salary rather than national minimum wage, we're looking at £30,000 plus just on the annual salary alone. If you were using that money to buy yourself a new car, or put a deposit on a flat, or invest in shares, I'm certain that you'd spend time researching and making sure that decision is absolutely the right one. Add on to those costs, the average cost per hire in the UK. Again, this data coming from Glassdoor, £3,000 on average just to recruit somebody. So let's transfer those massive costs over into an investment mindset and give the recruitment of any individual the focus it deserves. Let's reduce that pressure to fill vacancies urgently so that better decisions can be made, so we don't have to repeat the exercise over and over. Let's recognise that it's a vital task worthy of attention and time, so that we consider the details around taking on that new employee and save, as I've said, repeated recruitment campaigns. And equally, let's work around reducing any bias in that process so that we can benefit from a fair process, fair decisions, giving us the best candidate for the role, and of course resulting in a diverse team which is more representative of our customer base, because a more representative team of our customer base is going to give us better decisions and better service for those customers, okay? And I keep talking about time and attention. Well, let's look at that for a moment. I would say on average, it takes probably 3 months from the point at which someone resigns to the point at which a new person can join you. So that's all about, of course, creating the information you need to advertise a job, advertising, waiting for candidates to apply, shortlisting, interviewing, and then that person working their notice as well. It all adds up. And I do like to throw in some stats, as you've probably already gathered from now. And I just want to flag that the average length of a job interview process in the UK, again from Glassdoor, is 27.5 days. That's just the interviewing. It's a hugely long time. So I just need to caveat my let's give it time and attention with balance, because there is, of course, a risk of losing great candidates as they apply for other roles and those come up if we're taking too long by making decisions. Okay, so balance. But it's important that you know how long these things normally take. And it's important, I suppose, if it's not you recruiting personally, it's important that your recruiting managers know this is an investment worthy of time and attention, and let's do the job properly once rather than re-advertising and re-interviewing. Because I know there is a tendency to skip through things as quickly as possible, quickly get a bum on a seat quite often, which can really, it's not necessarily time well spent. So that's just 4 key areas in terms of proactive foundations in our 10-point framework. Laying your foundations to recruiting strategically and making the very best decisions. I think possibly what many people are interested in are the next 4 elements of our framework. And that's, of course, what happens when you have a vacancy to hand that needs working on. So that's more of our active recruitment phase, if you like. But let's move on to that. And you might find a vacancy has come up for 2 reasons. One is because someone's leaving, for whatever reason, or it could be that a new role has been created. So first things first, for business, if your business aims or delivery has changed, and let's face it, many of these have over the past 12 or 18 months, it's worth making sure that you understand from a business perspective, organisational perspective, your new vision for that role and targets clearly. So whether it's sales or products manufactured or client base, that clarity in what the business is all about is going to help you understand the type of role, the volume of work this person's going to be doing, the type of work and the speed of work they need to be doing. And all of that's really essential to be reviewed. Don't just blueprint carry over from last time round. Don't assume that's all going to be valid. It may be several years since that job description was last looked at. And then you've thought a bit about the job that actually needs doing. Again, rather than blueprinting, it's worth reviewing ways that you could bring a bit more efficiency to that role, perhaps, or productivity. So rather than recruit like for like, reflect on how the job's been done and whether it would be beneficial to change anything about that job. Think about the structure of the organisation, think about how that helps or hinders the flow of information, responsibility in and around the individuals and the team and departments. Feel free to ask the current incumbent for their views. It could be they're leaving because something about the job was just too hard, and there might be some simple changes they can suggest which will lighten the load for the next person or make it more efficient for the next person. But don't make that input, of course, the sole source of information. Do your own reflection as well. And then when you've got all of that information, make sure you put that down in a very clear job description. Start with the purpose of the job, the key areas of responsibility, the stakeholders, and getting this right is still key, because there is a direct correlation, of course, between the candidate having a realistic expectation of what's involved in that job, which is what you're writing, and how quickly they hit the ground running and how long they stay with you, okay? So get that job description as accurate as you possibly can. Don't be afraid to say it how it is. And finally, from that, of course, you'll be able to tweeze out specifically the skills and experience and knowledge a successful candidate will need in order to be able to do that job. So that's a list of, you might refer to it as a person specification. It's a list of essential criteria to do the job, and also some nice to haves. And this person specification is, of course, the criteria against which you're going to be assessing any applicants to the job, both at shortlisting stage and at interview stage as well. So just a few things to watch out for then. The more closely you align your selection criteria to the role, the better, of course. So for example, does that individual actually need a degree in maths, or will an A level in maths provide enough expertise? Because of course you're broadening out your candidate pool by having a lower level qualification. Do they need experience in your specific industry really? Or would a good enough understanding of that industry, which you can test at interview, be enough? Again, it widens or narrows your potential applicant pool, being as wider or broader with your selection criteria. And do challenge that person specification. Critically review those criteria to make sure you're not restricting yourself or candidates before you've even started, particularly in a tight job market. And then, of course, using a technical term here, the blurb, of course. This blurb gives the candidate an overview about the job and the company before going into the detail on the job and person specifications. This, if you like, is the bit that grabs the attention of the job seeker. So don't forget to mention the hooks you've got on the EVP, your employee value proposition, the benefits, why people might want to work for you. That is equally important. And on average, the job seeker will spend about 6 seconds looking at that blurb before deciding whether to skip on or whether to go further and have a look at the job spec and person specification. So on that blurb, between 600 to 700 words is about where to pitch it. That kind of length seems to be performing best at the moment. And the best performing posts today have about 13 words per sentence. So keep it simple. And use some form of structure to help the reader as well. Subheadings are great tools. Bullet points are good too to help draw the eye to important information or lists. Statistically, and you are coming to know that I love my statistics, the amount of bulleted content in your blurb, or indeed in your job description, can directly affect the proportion of men and women that apply. So it's worth bearing that in mind. Too many bullets, we'll see less women applying. Too few, we'll see less men applying. And the right amount in your blurb at the moment for a nice mix of candidates is about 1/3 of content being bullet pointed. So that's something to bear in mind. You might also want to know that posts with something in there about equal opportunities do better, fill 10% faster on average than others. But just stating we're an equal opportunities employer doesn't cut it. It needs to be further, deeper than that. And going back to Textio that I mentioned earlier, they found that listings using just bare minimum 4 equal opportunities statements saw a worse hiring result than no equal opportunities statement at all. So if you're going to use some words around equal ops and being a diversity friendly employer, you need really to talk about how and why you're inclusive, which makes it far more meaningful and far more engaging for the job seeker. So all good tips really there on the blurb. Part of one of the toughest parts of all of this, particularly in writing effective job posts, is staying ahead of trending language. And it can make the difference between getting the talent that you're looking for as opposed to losing them to your competition. So think about what's current in your industry, in your sector, what are people talking about? And if you can bring some of that excitement, some of that cutting edge stuff into the role and let candidates know you're primed for the future, that can be really powerful as well. And the other thing, of course, is using a mixture of direct and passive language. And using you and we, sometimes as well as more passive language, third person's language, the ideal candidate or the new recruit or the job seeker. So a mix of those two different types of language, again, can be more engaging for the job seeker. So powering on through, let's look at The next two elements to active recruitment, we have the selection process next. Now, before we've even put our job advert out there, there is more planning to be done. You've created your specific list of criteria, brilliant, but let's think about how we're going to measure each candidate against those criteria to decide on the best fit and the best person for the job. Most people do CV and interview. It's a great start. Add to that things like document checks. Have they really got that degree in maths? Let's see the certificates. So you have actual evidence, of course, rather than just relying on what you've been told. And what can you actually measure from that CV? Well, what I tend to do is make a list of what I would expect to see in that CV from my person specification and tick against each one for each candidate. And that gives you a crude form of ranking, of course, between candidates, who's met the most criteria. That's a really great starting point for your shortlist. And what can you measure from interview? Well, again, you can make a list of questions based on that person's specification. Again, to seek out the information you haven't yet got from the CV. But quite often a CV, an interview, perhaps it doesn't always give you enough information. Again, it's relying on what you've been told, which isn't always the best indicator, which means that the job can go to someone who talks a really great talk, has brilliant interview technique, but there might not always be the substance behind that. And I've certainly experienced that in the past. So what's missing? Well, there's two thoughts I have for you. The first is that you could always introduce phone screening in between the shortlisting and the interview. It's an initial chat. It makes sure they understand the job description. It's a really quick way of weeding out the people that haven't read it or haven't clocked the salary or the location, saving you time when you do get to interview stage. But you can also do work samples, and I'm a big fan of work samples. This can give you a far more accurate picture of how people perform in the role in reality. And this is, if you like, an actual piece of work you can get them to do. I'm not suggesting they come and work for you for a whole day unpaid. A couple of examples might be, if you're an electrician, it might be that you ask somebody to wire some lighting in or talk you through a circuit board, something really practical. It could be if you're recruiting for an administrative role, that you might have an exercise you can put people through, which tests their Microsoft Word skills or Excel skills, and certainly that's something we've produced for our clients in the past. And what I've done for the past in HR roles, my company, is to ask potential candidates to write a blog post on something relevant to HR and to our clients, which tests them on their understanding of our client base, of course, and current market developments. And quite often they're building a bit of legislation in there as well, which is great for me because I can really test their technical knowledge. Have a think about the role that the people are going to be doing and what can you get them to do so that you can see an actual demonstration of them in post before, of course, you make a job offer. And there's also psychometric testing. So there are so many of these out there, it can be a bit of a minefield. So what's really important is that you understand what you're looking to see from a psychometric test and why. So we could spend a whole hour talking about psychometric tests in themselves. I'm very happy to speak to people afterwards if they're interested in those. What other notes can I share with you? Well, have a think about your manager's skill level. Those people that are going to be doing the recruitment, are they aware of how their role fits into your thoughts for strategic recruitment in your organisation? Perhaps they need some training, give them the bigger picture view, so they can understand why each element of your recruitment process or this 10-step framework is really vital. It's important to avoid unconscious bias. So again, we could spend probably a half a day or a day looking at unconscious bias, but ways of avoiding those biases that we're not even aware that we've got are doing things like giving your CVs to the recruiting manager blind, perhaps with no names on, even no dates of birth if they are included on there, to make sure that there's no decisions being made on the basis of race, for example, or age. And once you've shortlisted, how diverse is your interview panel? If necessary, you can always get support from an external company. Can they add in somebody to your panel to make sure that you are, again, avoiding any unconscious bias, or you've got a different perspective coming on board? And candidate care is also worth thinking about at this particular point, because the candidate you reject today might well be your ideal candidate in 6 months' time for a different role in the same organisation. So even if you send them a generic BCC email thanking them for their time, apologising they haven't been successful this occasion, and keeping them interested, that's far better than leaving them hanging. And it takes 15 seconds to put together a quick email like that. And of course, that's one of your touch points in the employee journey, isn't it? Whether or not they're successful in the job, they may well apply or be interested in working for you next time around. Okay, all food for thought, but let's move on to routes to market. There are plenty of easy pickings out there in terms of where to share the details of your job advert and how to apply. Of course, there's plenty of social media. We find that there's a lot more power in the groups in Facebook and the groups in LinkedIn, rather than just sharing a job post on your personal profile or your company profile. There, of course, are dedicated groups dedicated to all sorts of different types of vacancies that you could be sharing that job advert into. What else? We've got tools like Indeed, which has free job listings as well, and can also do some automatic shortlisting for you. It could be a quick way to respond to your candidates as well, because they've got built-in applicant tracking and automated rejections. So that can be a really great tool for you. And then you've got the usual giants, you've got the monsters, the total jobs of this world. Again, really great, and quite often can dovetail in with your own applicant tracking system if you've got such a thing. But let's go deeper than that. Who do we want to target to apply for our roles, and why? How can we open up our recruitment further to attract the best candidates? Well, there are plenty of partnerships you could create, whether it's with universities, your customers or suppliers, for example. If they're managed appropriately, that can work really well. But what other networks are available to you? Budget allowing, of course, there are recruitment agencies out there. It can be quite expensive, starting around 12% or 15% and going upwards depending on the seniority of the post. But there are also some really great, more specific websites you might want to consider. So we know there are benefits to diverse teams. One of those benefits, of course, is that they make faster decisions than individual workers. And if diversity is a focus for you, there are really great websites like diversity.com for advertising and attracting a more diverse candidate range. There's buypnetwork.co.uk, there's bcwnetwork.com. It doesn't take long to find any of these. There are plenty of other examples. Just a quick Google will reveal all. There's even 10 to 2, which does, well, you can imagine what it does between 10 and 2 o'clock. So it really attracts a great number of working parents. So that's another great resource. And plenty of sector-specific websites, I'm sure, that you will know about. But if you're a small business, particularly an SME, you might want to think about more local approaches. Local newspapers, yes, print is still alive. Signs in your windows, flyers on your products, church notice boards even. What's key, I think, though, is monitoring the success of the places that you advertise. Which is most effective in terms of the quantity of candidates come through to you, or the quality of candidates come through to you. You might only need one great candidate if it comes from an obscure source, rather than the hundreds of applicants that might come through if you post a job on Facebook. So just have a think and review how well each route to market has performed for you. Because I see it over and over again, sticking to the same tried and tested methods of reaching your candidate market, which might be a post on your website and a post on your social media. It's just going to give you the same types of candidates over and over again. mixing it up a bit can be really advantageous to see what kind of talent you may well have been missing out on in the past. So I'm just conscious of time, and I'm going to move us on to securing success. These are the last two elements of our 10-point framework. And this is, well, let's start with onboarding, okay? So as a process, you know that checks quite often need to be done when you bring people in, and these quite often vary with sector or role. So for example, if you are working with children, you'll know that you need to do reference checks, DBS checks, identity checks, and so on and so forth. Senior financial roles, again, maybe a DBS, maybe a person of interest checks or credit checks. But what's certain is that every role, every employed role that you bring on board, you need to carry out that right to work in the UK check. And of course, who is automatically eligible to work in the UK has changed since Brexit, and it's very expensive to get that wrong. You could be charged £20,000 per employee. So make sure you've done the right check, you've kept, filed a copy of the documentation that you've seen. As a UK national, it's still a passport, but of course, various visas now will be needed depending on the country of origin or the nationality of the person in front of you. What else? Well, in terms of onboarding, I'm hoping that I don't need to say offer letter. I'm hoping I don't need to see a contract of employment by day one of employment. Those are essential. But there are also things like an employee handbook, which can contain, again, compliance information that you need to put out there. But if nothing else, we'll set out the rules and the ways of working and other information to support that transition of that individual into your company as comfortably as possible. So build this into your process to make sure people know from the start what will be required of them as a candidate, because of course that can help inappropriate candidates to deselect themselves, saving you time. But it's also important, of course, that your recruiting managers know what documentation will be needed to go in and out to make sure that the right documents are received at the right time. And then the induction, well, again, there's a correlation here between the strength of the induction that you give to that person and the speed with which they hit the ground running. So if you think about the induction as starting before day one, if someone's on a month's notice, 3 months notice, of course, maintaining contact during that time is going to build goodwill and trust. It's a great time for both you and them to prepare as best as possible so that when they do join on day one, they're really geared up and you're ready for them. Again, it's another really important moment in that employee journey. Let's make it memorable for the right reasons. And by that, I mean, thinking about all the system stuff they need to know. So IT systems, phones, equipment, any organisation-wide information that they will need, reading materials. Is there a plan for their team or their role, or even, in fact, the business as a whole? We've touched on contracts and handbooks already. Really, this is fundamentals that everyone needs to have. And then we need to think about who they need to meet, those key people. Is there any basic training that everybody has? Equality and diversity training, health and safety training, data protection or GDPR training, safeguarding training. This is, it's almost the sheep dip stuff, and I hate to use that word, but it's something that every single employee should go through on day one. What are those things for you, and how do we build that in? Then let's look at the social or the team aspects of their induction. It's the keeping in touch. Are there any socials or functions that perhaps during that lead up to day one and beyond that they need to be involved with? How can we help them meet their stakeholders? And how can we integrate them properly into that team? Do we need to do some team building? Do they need a buddy? It's important that they know how the team works and how they fit into that team and in amongst the other roles. And vitally, of course, is from an induction perspective, is their individual needs. So this is where you build on those fundamentals, the sheep dip stuff, if you like, according to that person's individual needs. It could be that they've never worked in your sector before, they need something on that. It could be those specific systems they don't know about. Did anything come up during interview as a learning need or a gap to fill? And then there's the human touch. Those small things that make that person feel special. So one employer I worked for sent a packet of wildflower seeds to every new recruit to reflect professional growth and their passion for the environment. Other employers have sent flowers on the first day, but there's plenty you can do with no budget at all. It's the human touch. It's as simple as remembering names, remembering they're coming sometimes, making sure there's a clear desk for them, somewhere to hang their coat, and someone perhaps to go to lunch with, that kind of thing. Really what this is about is harnessing that employee will be keen to get their teeth into the role, and keeping that feeling of being special and cared for. And that's how we have high engaged, high performing teams. So make a plan for all of those things, share it with the employee and make sure it happens. And then the final element here is on learning. So review and reflect on each of these areas. Did we attract the right candidates? Did we get the volume we wanted, the quality? Where did the process get stuck? How much time did it take to fill the vacancy? And how did it feel from the employee perspective and from the recruiting manager's perspective? Get some feedback from the employee. You could do an entry questionnaire, just like there are exit questionnaires. Learn and improve what works for you and your organisation. It's like knowledge management, isn't it? Find a way to store those learnings, refine what you're doing, and share that knowledge so that it's not lost over time, so that you can be increasingly effective when it comes to recruiting your next great candidate. Now I'm going to whiz on to applying the framework for your organisation. If we have time to do this properly, but this is an approach that you could use, which I often use with my coaching clients, and that's what they would stop doing, having reflected, but they don't need to do anymore, what they need to start doing that's new to get even better at their recruitment, and what is it that they would like to continue doing because it's working effectively for them. So map yourself a list of each of these things that you need to change or continue doing to become more strategic in your workplace recruitment. And then go SMART. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about SMART objectives, but this is about pinning down the detail, whether it's that you need to start training your managers, for example. Define for yourself which managers, how many are there, what do they need to understand and by when, who's going to deliver that training and when should it start. Because by pinning down the SMART details, you're far more likely to achieve that goal. So SMART, for those of you that don't know, is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And if each of your change items has those 5 SMART elements, you're setting yourself up for success. You have created yourself a really great action plan to bring recruitment to a far more strategic and effective place. Now, I did say that I would touch on recruiting during a pandemic. And there are, certainly what I've identified, there are 2 current issues at the moment. There is an overwhelm of candidates that are not all appropriate. So cutting through some of the volume of inappropriate candidates is key. And one of the key tools we use here is getting people to deselect themselves. So making sure the criteria are very clearly defined can be a great way of that person going, oh no, I don't have a degree in maths or whatever it might be, I'm not going to apply. I've also found that using tools like Facebook recruitment or even LinkedIn recruitment, it's very easy for applicants to apply just by hitting a button. So I've stopped using that as an avenue because I get lots of rubbish coming through, people that haven't read the job description or the person specification, people that haven't even answered any qualifying questions. So I have stepped away from using those tools in that way. where there's an overwhelm of candidates. I still post things on Facebook, job-wise, but I don't turn on the recruitment tool as an example. So transparent essential criteria and checks are fundamental. You can have higher standards, you can be explicit about what's required, and then make it that little step harder for candidates to apply if there's an overwhelm. At the very least, make sure that they've read what they're applying for, because those people that take the time and effort to apply, of course, are far more likely to make the time and effort in the role as well. Secondly, you can take the legwork out of a high volume of candidates by using some form of artificial intelligence or applicant tracking system. So as I've said before, Indeed can do this for you. So for things like total jobs. So if someone are doing it automatically, Indeed will not even show you candidates that don't meet your set criteria. Brilliant, but make sure your privacy notice is up to date. If you're using some form of artificial intelligence, you do need to be explicit about that in your privacy notice. And the other thing, of course, about applicant tracking systems is that they can really reduce the amount of admin that you're going through. So we use Breathe HR. It's a brilliant tool. It's automated a lot of processes. You can still keep the human touch to all of that. Nobody gets lost. And I'm very happy to share a link if anyone wants to mess around with the system for a couple of weeks for free, or have a demo, in fact. Really great for SMEs, we've found, really affordable as well. Surprisingly, despite many redundancies and a high rate of unemployment, 5% I think it is at the moment, there are still lots of people struggling to find good quality candidates. Brexit, of course, may well be playing a role in that. But this is where things like your succession planning can be key. So looking ahead, providing those development opportunities, which again is highly sought after, to allow those internal candidates the opportunity to progress when the time is right. That can be a really great tool. You could think about enhancing your employee referral program. So that could reward your employees if they introduce a successful recruit and they're still there 3 months, 6 months later. And then you can also use targeting, whether that's, well, so any social media platform actually, to promote your vacancy. Again, targeting the audience you're looking for, that can help too, rather than a broader remit. And of course, if you're posting your vacancies on your website, if your website isn't using some form of Google plugin or something similar for vacancies, that can restrict how easy your vacancy is to find. So certainly the Google plugin we've got on our own website, and we do advertise client vacancies there, has a Google plugin, which means that the candidates don't need to go to any specific job website or even our web page. They can type into the search bar accountancy jobs in wherever, and that will show, just through using this Google plugin and all the websites that are out there, relevant vacancies to them. So far easier for candidates to find vacancies if your website is set up correctly with some plugin to enable that facility. And then think about how to access new candidate pools that perhaps you haven't tapped into before. I'm sure social media has been done to death if you're struggling. So have a look at ethnicjobsite.uk, or as I've referred to before, different more inclusive websites targeting specific groups. That can be really powerful, but of course making sure, if you're targeting a specific ethnic origin, for example, make sure that's not incongruent with your employer branding or your corporate branding, and make sure that your employee value proposition is linked there as well. There's no point targeting working mums. Well, maybe there is. There's less point targeting working mums if you know that your working hours are 6 AM till 6 PM, for example. And then you've got considering things like careers fairs, job centres, and of course the universal job match function run by the Job Centre Plus is another free way of advertising vacancies. So lots going on, lots of different ways that don't just rely on posts on social media and your websites to attract a variety of candidates. So what we can do to help? Well, we work on recruitment with our clients in several different ways, none of which are akin to an agency model. We're not a recruitment agency. So operationally, of course, you can use our selection box recruitment support, which is basically any aspect of that recruitment process. We can work on that as part of your internal team for a short period, whether that's just writing job descriptions or just shortlisting or just interviewing, or indeed partnering with you to do that with you, supporting you doing that. So all or part of that process, depending on your needs and your budget. Strategically, of course, we can look at the way you currently recruit. We can apply our strategic 10-point framework we've just been through today and make some recommendations for how you can improve your pipeline of potential candidates. We do a deep dive on each of those 10 areas. And then, of course, on a project basis, on any one of those areas, anything that comes out of our recommendation, if you would like us to. So we can do plenty to help you there. And of course, other ways we can help, in addition to delivering training, whether it's for your current workforce or yourselves as individuals, we've got this other free training we're doing, the power downloads. I feel like I've powered through the past 50 minutes. Upcoming training, of course, is managing poor performance, equality and diversity revisited. And if you sign up with the link in the chat box, we'll make sure to let you know about those training as they arise, and we'll be scheduling the next couple in the next week or two as well. There's also free engagement and wellbeing talks through Talks for Teams. So this is a voluntary initiative. I've drawn together some real industry experts, and we're offering these free talks. Really, it's been during the pandemic, but we're still offering them for the next few months as well, aimed at employees in your workplace on a variety of subjects, from financial health to nutrition to stress to leading well, just really to help you engage teams at a time where things might not be as easy as perhaps they used to be. So that's worth you knowing about as well, and that's at talksforteams.co.uk. And there we've come to the end of our power download on strategic recruitment. I do feel like I've powered on through, but I'm really happy to spend the next few minutes asking any questions from those of you that have any. So over to you.